and Rich stepped into the next intake room, only to be hit by a wall of something. Rich gagged immediately. Oh wow, this place smells even worse than the last one. Ryo, resigned, took a deep sniff and exhaled. Yeah, well, at least now you are not the only one who stinks. Rich grinned. That is comforting. The massive hall was filled with young men, most of whom looked just like them, fresh-faced, slightly terrified, and absolutely reeking of bad decisions. A long line snaked through the room, inching forward at a crawl. Some of the guys whispered anxiously, others laughed nervously. A few looked like they were on the verge of tears. As they stood in line, they overheard snippets of conversation. Yeah, man, just one punch and suddenly I am here. My dad is going to kill me if I do not die in training first. Honestly, better than starving on the streets. Ryo remained silent, absorbing it all. He had never seriously considered joining the fighting corps. Sure, it was always there. A kingdom was always at war somewhere. But it had always felt like something other people did, not him. Suddenly, the line jostled as the crowd shifted. Next person who touches me or my stuff is dead. The voice came from a tense, wiry-looking guy a few feet ahead, his eyes darting around like a cornered animal. Rich's grin widened. Without hesitation, he reached over several heads and smacked the angry man on the back of the head. The guy spun around, fury in his eyes, searching for his attacker. Rich erupted in laughter. That guy is going to be on my team. He is hilarious. Ryo shook his head, running a hand down his face. Rich was not done. Pointing straight at Ryo, he yelled, "This shy guy right here wants to put his Pepe in every cute girl he meets." A wave of laughter rippled through the line. Even a few of the workers smirked. Ryo's face turned red for a fraction of a second before he exhaled and accepted his fate. With a dramatic flourish, he raised his arms, blew a kiss to the crowd, and spun in a slow, exaggerated bow. The room roared, but just as the laughter hit its peak, everyone shut up. A thunderous voice cut through the noise like a blade. The room fell silent. A broad-shouldered officer stood near the front, his piercing eyes scanning the recruits like a hawk searching for prey. "If I hear another word, you will all regret it." Rich, of course, opened his mouth. Before he could utter a sound, Ryo immediately pressed a finger to Rich's lips, then held a single finger to his own and gestured toward the officer. The man stared at them for a long, dangerous second. Then, close enough, "Everyone drop and give me 50 push-ups." Groans erupted throughout the hall. The man's eyes flashed. "Make it 100 for groaning." Instant silence. Then the only sound was dozens of young men hitting the floor. 50 more for anyone who vomits. Ryo, struggling through his push-ups, made the grave mistake of looking at Rich. Rich was mouthing along with everything the officer said. Then when the officer finished, Rich mimed vomiting. Ryo bit his tongue to stop from laughing. Someone else was not so lucky. A guy a few rows down snorted and instantly regretted it. The officer descended upon him. "You think this is funny?" Before the poor guy could answer, the officer kicked him hard in the stomach. The guy immediately vomited. "Looks like funny man Ralph just earned everyone another 100 push-ups." No one made a sound. Even breathing too loudly felt dangerous. Meanwhile, Rich, who was somehow completely invisible to this officer's wrath, was now right at the man's feet, continuing his silent, theatrical mimicry. They pushed through the pain. As the officer counted down the last 15 push-ups, the tension in the room was palpable. At 10, he stepped onto Rich's back. Rich barely flinched. The officer smirked. "Do not worry. I cannot see anything you are doing." Then he lowered his head between Ryo and Rich and whispered, just loud enough for them to hear, "You two will be the first people I break." And as he counted the final push-up, 1, he stepped off Rich and disappeared into the crowd. As he disappeared, Rich looked at Ryo and mouthed the words, "My new hero," in an exaggerated fashion. The only sounds left in the room were heavy breathing and the steady voice of the woman at the front. Next, the line inched forward. The scent of sweat, fear, and regret thickened the air. Ryo and Rich shuffled ahead, their bodies still aching from the push-ups. They were close enough now to hear the young men at the front of the line being barked at. "Get down to your skivvies." Ryo saw Rich's face twist in confusion. With a sigh, Ryo leaned in and whispered, "Underwear." Rich's eyes widened in realization. Then, to Ryo's absolute horror, Rich started rubbing himself. Ryo recoiled. "Dude, what the hell are you doing?" Rich shrugged. It is cold here, and there are pretty girls right over there. Ryo buried his face in his hands. This was perfectly in line with how the last few hours had gone. Besides, Rich continued with a snort, I am not wearing any underwear. Ryo gagged and physically turned away. He was not even surprised at this point, just resigned. The line moved again. For the first time since their intake started, Rich's face showed something unfamiliar. Fear. Oh no, Rich whispered. I think I rubbed it too much. Ryo refused to look. He absolutely did not need that image in his head. He squeezed his eyes shut. This is my life now. Next, the word rang out like a death sentence. As they stepped through the threshold, they were immediately greeted by a no-nonsense nurse. Strip to your skivvies, she ordered, barely looking up from her clipboard. Rich sighed dramatically. Apologies in advance. Then, with a theatrical flourish, he dropped his pants and proclaimed, the tiger has awakened. Ryo clenched his jaw and stared at the ceiling. The nurse, unfazed, glanced down at Rich's situation, then past the boys and murmured softly, Code 2. Ryo had no idea what that meant. A moment later, an ice-cold bucket of water was dumped over Rich. The sound he made was not human. Shivering, his entire body convulsing, Rich turned to Ryo, his lips trembling. Before he could say anything, Ryo flatly stated, You have a new hero. Still shivering, Rich saluted the nurse. Thank you for your service. The nurse did not react. Someone tossed a pair of tidy-whities at Rich. He pulled them on, adjusted them with far more enthusiasm than necessary, and immediately started stretching. I feel like a new man, he declared. For the first time since their arrest, Ryo actually smiled. Maybe this future was not looking so bad after all. As long as Rich was around, he knew one thing was certain. At least he would never stop laughing. Next,